Scientists tell us that hurricanes on the outer portion, the wall of the hurricane, is very, very turbulent and very powerful, and it's a destructive power. But at the very center, the eye of the hurricane, things are very calm. And that seemed like an apt analogy for what we're going to talk about today, about how to be calm amidst chaos. And the idea for this program came from the fact that over the years, I've had a lot of clients ask me, how do you remain so calm? No matter how dire the situation is or how frantic the people around you, you remain really calm, and then you craft a really simple solution. How do you do that? And I am embarrassed to admit that previously, I've been a little flippant in my answer. I'd say, oh, well, I learned a long time ago that a cool head prevails, and frankly, I like to win. Well, that's true, but it's not very helpful for somebody who wants to learn how to be more calm. So this program today is my attempt to remedy that. So if we want to be calm, the first thing we have to do is remember that every problem has a solution. Now, on the surface, that seems fairly obvious. But when something is surfaced that is really scaring the bejabbers out of you, it's hard to remember that there's a solution to every problem. So one of the keys, one of the things that I found that works very well in quickly setting those emotions aside is to simply ask yourself this question. When in my life have I faced a situation in which I've had no background and no experience, and I failed to produce a result? When in my life have I faced a situation in which I've had no background or experience and failed to produce a result? The answer that I always get from my clients is never. Now, we may not have gotten it right the first time, the second, the fifth, but we always get there. So when we realize that no matter what surfaces, we have the capacity to deal with it, we will find a way to deal with it, we can quickly set aside the fear, the anxiety, the frustration that we're feeling in that moment, set those emotions aside, and free up our minds and refocus it on crafting solutions. So that's step one. And in reality, that's going to happen one way or another. Because eventually, if the emotions continue, you're going to exhaust yourself. And when you exhaust yourself and you realize that you've gotten nowhere in the process, you're going to shift gears and your mind's going to shift to finding a solution. This question simply accelerates that transition from fear, anxiety, and frustration to analysis and problem solving. So that's how you capture the calm to begin with. Everything else that we're going to talk about from here on deals with focusing your attention on a specific activity, and when your mind is that focused, it automatically keeps emotions at bay. So, what's the next step then? The next step is to listen for incongruities. Now, one of the things that you find is that when everyone around you is frantic, they're also very talkative. Because talk is the release valve, the pressure release valve. It's kind of like the relief valve on a pressure cooker. It keeps things from exploding, okay? So they're talking and talking and talking. What you want to be listening for are the incongruities. The difference between what they're perceiving the problem to be and how bad it really is versus what you're seeing, which is obviously going to be, because you're not emotional, a more objective, more realistic evaluation of the situation. You also want to look at the difference between what they're saying that they want and what actions they're actually taking. So when you look at these incongruities, what you find is the real source of the problem. And as soon as you discover the source of the problem, ideas will come to you quickly in terms of possible solutions. So the next step then, as you're starting to get possible solutions, is to make sure that what you're looking at is the best possible solution, the one in which everybody wins. And typically what happens is those initial thoughts, initial solutions that you come up with are imperfect. They don't really deal with all the issues. They don't deal with all of people's fears and anxieties or frustrations. They don't deal with that complete package. So you keep listening and you keep going through iterations of possible solutions, and each one is going to improve on the last because you're considering new factors along the way. And again, when your mind is this focused on that activity, the emotions are held at bay. You can remain calm during this process. The next step is to look for commonality. Now, I know that sounds contradictory because I just said a moment ago, listen for incongruities. Here's the distinction. In the early stage, you're listening for incongruities for the source of the problem, to identify the source. What you're listening for as the solutions are coming to you, the commonality, because in the commonality, you're going to find the solution. So to give you an example, years ago, I was on the board of a non-for-profit school, and the prior year, we'd had a double-digit increase in tuition. And the executive director had worked really hard during the year to keep costs down, reduce costs, so that we didn't have to have another tuition increase that year. And she was adamant about it. The board agreed with her that that was fine. But the treasurer wanted, at the same time, to require the parents to sign up for automatic withdrawal so that there was more consistent cash flow on collecting the tuition and a lot less time and energy expended in doing that. No invoicing, you didn't have to make daily deposits, those sorts of things. You didn't have to follow up with delinquencies. And they were at odds. The executive director didn't want to include the communication about the automatic withdrawal because to her, it gave a sense of, well, we're giving you something in the way of not having a tuition increase, but the gotcha is we're going to require you to do the automatic withdrawal. And the treasurer wanted to do the two announcements simultaneously because it was going to improve cash flow and reduce all these things. And they were at odds. They were going back and forth on this. The commonality there was that the executive director had been working for a year on cost reduction and cost control. By saving time on invoicing and follow-up and making deposits, following up delinquencies, was going to do what? Reduce the costs. It's going to help keep costs down. So what I suggested to them, or the question that I asked, and I really believe the question's the right way to go, is what would happen if we said, we're going to be able to hold the tuition at the same rate because we've been able to cut costs and reduce costs. You can help us do that by signing up for the automatic withdrawal. The commonality was the cost reduction. They weren't seeing it. And so when we brought that into the solution makes sense and satisfied everybody's need. Okay? So that's why at one point in time you're looking for incongruities, the next you're looking for the commonality. The next step is time is on your side. Now I know that flies in the face of conventional wisdom, but I've been known to do that on occasion. So, the thing here is that we all know, and we tend to forget, that when we put time pressure on ourselves, we create stress. And when we create stress, we reintroduce emotion into the process. And with that emotion, our ability, our mental capacity diminishes. So if scientists are right that we only use about 10% of our brain, we start bringing the emotions back into it, that probably drops to about 3 or 4%. So knowing that time is on your side and not putting the pressure on yourself to come up with a solution very quickly, you keep your mind free and you're less likely to make mistakes and have to redo things. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect is when you're talking to people who are frantic, when you're allowing them to vent their frustration and their fears and you're listening for the incongruities, it gives you more time to really find the source of the problem. Because if you allow them the time they need in order to vent, to air their frustrations, their fears, their anxiety, you're going to learn a lot more about where they are and what's really happening. Plus, what you're going to find, and I think you've all had this experience as well, if you try to reason with somebody who's in a highly emotional state, it doesn't work, right? Yeah, I hear the laughter, right? It's just like you might as well beat your head against the wall. It's just not happening. So again, allowing the time to work for you and have people who are frantic do that. And then the third element then is to engage them, allow them time to vent so that their minds get into the mode of problem solving and away from the emotions. So use time as being on your side. Build consensus along the way. Now, the example that I gave you about the school was fairly simple. There weren't a lot of working parts to that whole issue, okay? But a lot of problems are a lot more complex than that. As you're coming up with potential solutions and you're asking questions, look for the commonality and build on that as you're going along rather than waiting till you've got a full-blown plan then trying to convince people. And one of the best ways to build consensus is to ask questions. You notice that I emphasized that in the example. I didn't tell them that this is what they should say. I asked them what would happen if you said this. And by doing that, you engage them in the thought process, and what they're doing as they go through that thought process is they're validating the conclusions they're reaching with their own experience. And if it makes sense to them, they buy into it more readily because they've, in essence, persuaded themselves. And then finally, let the idea be theirs. Colin Powell, in his autobiography, said, "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit." And interestingly, as I thought about that, I realized that the times when I was looking for recognition for my contribution, people weren't willing to give it. But when I didn't care, they readily credited me with my contribution. So with these few simple steps, you can remain calm, you can remain centered, you can develop a reputation for being calm amidst chaos. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
You also take drugs to help.
It's a natural high. And I really do like to win. Yes,
I do have a serious question, I think. You talked about oftentimes we can't get to that right solution the first time. It takes several times, and you have to have sort of the patience to work through that. How do you minimize or mitigate the frustration and increase the tolerance for repeated failures until you get to the final solution, particularly with your clients that you're working with?
Okay. For one thing, I use different language. They're not failures. They're simply iterations, the next step in the process. And I have no illusions or no expectation that I'm going to come up with the best solution on the first go, or even the third or the fifth. And that, to me, that's a continuous learning process. And learning is a good thing, so it's not a negative. The fact that I'm going through multiple things, plus, what I experienced over the years, that everything happens in its time. And I've learned to trust that and get comfortable with it, and so I don't feel time pressure in anything that I do anymore. I just don't. It's a great question, though, Les. Thank you. Any other questions?
So do you find that if you are the eye of the hurricane, if you're the calm one in that chaotic situation, that it spreads, it's contagious to the other people, that they realize that if you're being calm, they can be calm and get things accomplished?
I can't say that I recognize that, Thad. It's possible, and it may be that they calm a little more quickly, and I just haven't noticed it. I think it's a possibility, but I can't say that I specifically observed that.
So I've had mentors tell me, and I've experienced this, that what Thad said has actually at least been true for me, is as everybody gets excited, if I go the opposite way, it tends to calm things down. So that was coaching that I had probably 30 years ago from one of my mentors, and I found that to be a very effective tool for me anyhow.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill.
Along with what Bill's saying, it's kind of interesting when you find a confrontational person, you talk really slow and calm, it completely unnerves them to the point where they lose their focus. I love doing that.
Yeah,
And then I win. So it's all about winning. No.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mark. You know, if you want to diffuse a situation, you know, somebody that's confrontational, somebody that's angry, simply take the opposite tack. And that can work as well if they're just Monday, you know, and you need some energy and some excitement from them. Say something that'll tick them off. You know, you can re-energize them, and then you can calm them down again. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.